Hey guys, welcome to my channel, The Story Hour. Make sure to let me know in the comment section where you are listening from. Now get comfortable and enjoy. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long, dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, like I said. But I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she. And life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of Oj in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face, staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it, not out of irritation but fear. For some reason at that moment I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her, or even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what fuck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs. But I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed. But she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again, from over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that," I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all, had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home, and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was fucking terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck, Lynn? I snapped. This shit is getting really fucking annoying. I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk. But instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just fucking stop it," I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a fucking lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom. So I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I'd wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams. all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word. She'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me, I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now." She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth, slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife, Rebecca, hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up, to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home." And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. "I don't want to pry, because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can be mended?" Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. "I don't know, she's like a different person," I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed. She said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her. I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know. Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. Number she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. Number she looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I swore an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believed she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. Yes, she answered, already sounding irritated. Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk? I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin? She said, coolly. It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something... I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is that you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues, I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking, or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured, as her mother, you would be as well. I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me. She snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn. I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Marianne, I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else, someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets, like he was going on a fucking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here? Shit," Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the fuck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something?" Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction, but fuck me, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." "All right." I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. Who the fuck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that? Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a fucking exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any—" His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making. A sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving, to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements, as if she were nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. I love you, Lynn, I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding, I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder, and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast, scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run, go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. "You, playing hide-and-seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her, and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rear-view mirror. Sure, I'd see her there, running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search. But of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow, I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. I found you. And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. I was driving home after another grueling day at the office, the monotony of the highway punctuated only by the steady hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of passing street lights. Fatigue weighed on me, and I longed for a brief respite. A momentary pause before the solitude of my apartment reclaimed me. That's when I spotted it, a solitary pit stop, nestled beside the overgrown roadside, its neon sign sputtering like a dying heartbeat in the darkness. Pulling into the gravel lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was more than just an ordinary fuel station. The building, a ramshackle structure with peeling paint and grimy windows, exuded an eerie stillness. I stepped out of my car, the chill of the night air mingling with the acrid smell of gasoline, and made my way to the entrance. The metal door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, revealing a dim interior bathed in the weak glow of a lone fluorescent bulb. Inside, the air was thick with the stale scent of cigarettes and something unidentifiably sour. A hint of decay, perhaps, or the weight of forgotten secrets. I set my bag down on a rickety table in a cramped seating area that overlooked a grimy window. For a moment I allowed myself to relax, thinking a quick break was all I needed before I got back on the road. But as I settled into an uneasy stillness, subtle disturbances began to weave their way into my awareness. It started with a soft, almost imperceptible rustling, like the brush of fabric against old wallpaper, and I found myself straining to pinpoint its source. The sound could have been the wind slipping through a crack, I told myself, but the pit stop's closed-off nature made that explanation unlikely. I caught fleeting glimpses of movement in the peripheral vision, a dark, shifting shape that vanished the moment I turned to look directly. Each time I dismissed it as a trick of my tired mind. Another odd creak or whisper of sound shattered the fragile calm. Curiosity and mounting unease drove me to explore further. I left the seating area and followed a narrow corridor that led to a small storage room. The corridor was barely lit by a single, flickering bulb that cast erratic shadows along the stained walls. The floor, scattered with dust and crumpled newspapers, seemed to murmur secrets as I passed. My pulse quickened with every step, as if the building itself were alive, watching. Inside the storage room, I inspected the disarray of old supplies and forgotten junk. Amid the clutter, a crumpled note caught my eye. Its paper was yellowed and brittle, the message scrawled in hasty, almost frantic handwriting. They're watching. They never leave. A chill raced down my spine. Who had written this, and what had they seen? I barely had time to ponder the note's cryptic warning before a low chuckle, so soft and deliberate that it seemed to emanate from the very walls, made me whirl around. In the darkened corner, a pair of glinting eyes held my gaze for a split second, before disappearing into the gloom. My heart thundered as I bolted back to the main area. The once familiar room now appeared transformed. The lights dimmed further, and shadows stretched into unnatural shapes. I noticed with a sinking dread that the door through which I'd entered now stood slightly ajar, as if someone had forced it open from the other side. A series of measured footsteps echoed in the hallway beyond, a sound that should have belonged to an empty building. Instinct overtaking fear, I grabbed a heavy rusted fire extinguisher from a nearby rack, a makeshift weapon against whatever lurked in the dark, and crept toward the door. Peering around the corner, I caught sight of a hunched figure near the window, its features obscured by the interplay of light and shadow. As I strained to see clearly, the figure slowly turned, and I recognized a pair of eyes that shone with a predatory glint. "You shouldn't have been here," the man said, his voice low, gravelly, and unnervingly calm. "This pit stop, it's mine." I stood frozen, disbelief mingling with terror. "Mine? What are you talking about?" I managed to choke out. A cold, twisted smile curved his lips as he stepped forward. "I keep the roads clean. You, a weary traveler, wandering in with your guard down. Your easy prey." His words sent a shudder through me, as I realized that the subtle disturbances I'd dismissed earlier were no mere figments of my imagination. They were the precursors to this moment. In that heartbeat, the pit stop metamorphosed from a harmless rest stop into a deadly trap. Adrenaline surged through me as I swung the fire extinguisher with every ounce of strength I possessed. The impact struck him square across the face, and he staggered momentarily, but his recovery was swift. Like a specter, he lunged at me with a speed that defied expectation. We clashed in the narrow corridor, a desperate melee of swinging blows and frenzied dodges. The metallic clang of our struggle reverberated off the peeling walls, punctuated by my ragged breaths and his low, furious growls. Despite his apparent frailty, the man moved with a predatory grace that made every step a deadly gamble. I fought with a mixture of raw panic and a stubborn will to survive, each strike and parry fueled by the sheer terror of the situation. As we grappled, I glimpsed something that froze my blood. A flash of a familiar insignia on a chain hanging from his neck, something I'd seen before in an old article about unsolved highway disappearances. The realization was a bitter twist. This was no random madman, but a predator who had been stalking the roads for a long time, preying on unsuspecting travelers. The note in the storage room suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. This pit stop wasn't just a roadside nuisance. It was a carefully chosen lair for someone whose presence haunted the dark corners of the highway. In a final burst of desperate clarity, I managed to wrench myself free from his grasp and kick him back. He crashed against a stack of battered boxes, the collision sending a cascade of dusty debris swirling in the flickering light. His eyes met mine, burning with a mixture of rage and a resigned inevitability as he whispered, "You cannot escape what you have become part of." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I was not merely a victim of chance. I had stumbled into a snare set by a man who viewed every passing motorist as a potential sacrifice. My mind raced with the horrifying possibility that his twisted ritual had claimed countless others, their fates sealed in the quiet darkness of this forsaken pit stop. Without waiting for his recovery, I turned and bolted for the exit. I burst through the door into the cool night air, my heart hammering as I sprinted across the gravel lot toward my car. The pit stop's neon sign flickered behind me, its erratic glow a silent testament to the horror I had just escaped. I fumbled with my keys hands trembling, and jumped into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes watching me from the darkness. A final, silent farewell. Driving down the deserted highway, I couldn't shake the gnawing terror that clung to my every thought. The memory of that pit stop, with its subtle whispers and sudden violent terror, seared itself into my mind. I wondered if I had merely been lucky to escape, or if I had now become a part of a larger, sinister tapestry, a thread woven into the dark history of that place. Even as the miles passed under my wheels and the first hints of dawn began to soften the night, a deep unease remained. The open road stretched before me, yet every darkened curve and lonely stretch of highway promised that the shadows might follow. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be truly safe again, or if the memory of that night would haunt me in every solitary drive. One thing, however, was certain. The pit stop and the man who ruled it would forever linger in the recesses of my mind, a relentless reminder that sometimes coming home can lead you straight into the jaws of your worst nightmares. It started as a much-needed escape, a weekend camping trip with my best friend, Matt, far from the clamor of everyday life. We drove deep into the woods, where the tangled pines and whispering breezes promised solitude and a respite from our hectic routines. As dusk fell, I couldn't help but feel that the woods held secrets older than time itself. We found a small clearing by a gently babbling stream, the perfect spot to set up camp. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. I remember the satisfying crackle of the campfire as Matt and I arranged logs in a rough circle, the orange flames dancing against the encroaching darkness. For a while, everything felt normal. The chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, even the soft murmur of our conversation as we reminisced about old times. But as night deepened, subtle things began to shift. At first, it was a series of small, almost dismissible disturbances. I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow flickering just beyond the circle of firelight, or hear a soft, almost musical rustle among the trees that didn't match the wind's cadence. I chalked it up to tired eyes and overactive imagination. The woods, after all, were full of life, both seen and unseen. Later that night, while I sat quietly watching the flames, I noticed that Matt had grown unusually silent. He'd been laughing heartily just moments before, but now he sat staring into the darkness, his expression distant, as if he were lost in thought. I asked him if everything was all right, but his response was a quiet nod and a distracted murmur. Something about his eyes unsettled me. They glimmered in the firelight with an intensity that felt almost otherworldly. As the hours passed, the disturbances became harder to ignore. There were moments when the crackling fire seemed drowned out by a strange, soft whispering that floated on the breeze. At times, I thought I heard my name being called from the depths of the forest, each time fading into silence as soon as I strained to listen. The woods, which once felt comforting in their natural rhythm, now seemed to pulse with a hidden menace. I tried to shake off the growing unease. After all, it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. But then, as I was drifting between wakefulness and sleep in my sleeping bag, I was startled awake by a creak, a slow, deliberate sound like someone stepping on brittle twigs. I sat up in the dark, heart pounding, and scanned the area with a flashlight. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a figure dart between the trees, vanishing before I could make out any details. I called out softly, "Matt?" but received no reply. Concern gnawed at me. I edged over to Matt's tent and found it unlatched, the flap fluttering in the cold wind. Inside, his sleeping bag lay undisturbed, but Matt was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through me as I shouted his name into the blackness. A distant rustle answered, then nothing at all. I grabbed my phone, its weak screen light a poor substitute for the daylight now hidden behind heavy, dark clouds. After what felt like an eternity of frantic searching around our campsite, I found traces that Matt had been in a part of the woods I hadn't noticed earlier. A narrow trail, marked by disturbed leaves and broken twigs. I followed the signs with mounting dread, each step punctuated by the sound of my own racing heartbeat. The woods around me grew denser, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, and the whispering wind began to sound almost like low voices murmuring secrets just beyond understanding. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing where an abandoned campfire pit lay cold and covered in ash. There, to my horror, was a tattered jacket that I recognized as Matt's. I bent down and picked it up, its fabric still carrying a faint trace of his familiar scent. My mind raced with questions. Had he been taken? Had he wandered off? And what had left these eerie, inexplicable signs? I returned to our campsite, where the fire had long since died out, and found that everything felt off. The woods were eerily silent. Too silent. I sat, trying to steady my trembling hands, when a soft sound behind me made me jump. I turned to see a dark silhouette moving slowly among the trees. My pulse hammered as the figure came into focus. A man, or something that looked almost human, with eyes that reflected the dying light. His expression was one of sorrow and menace, and as he stepped closer, a cold dread took hold of me. "Have you seen him?" the figure asked in a voice that was both gentle and chilling. I stuttered. Seen who?" He inclined his head slightly, as if considering my question. "Your friend. He wandered too far. The woods have a way of changing things." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I took a step back, realizing that the presence before me was no mere wanderer, but something much older, a being that thrived in the dark between the trees. Before I could demand more answers, a sudden rustling from the undergrowth made the figure vanish into the night. I ran back to the trail, desperate to find any sign of Matt. As I navigated the labyrinth of towering pines and tangled brush, I began to notice an unsettling pattern. The flickering shadows and whispered voices were not random, but seemed to converge on one point. A small, overgrown clearing with a dilapidated wooden structure at its center. Drawn to it, I found the remnants of an old ranger station, its walls crumbling and windows shattered. The air around it was unnaturally cold, and I could almost hear a soft humming emanating from within. With no other choice, and my concern for Matt mounting, I pushed the creaking door open. Inside, dust motes danced in the narrow beams of moonlight that filtered through broken glass, and the smell of mildew and decay was overwhelming. On a rickety table lay a journal, its pages filled with frantic scribbles and desperate warnings. The forest takes those who stray. It steals their essence, replacing them with shadows. Beware the whispers in the pines. A chill ran through me as I flipped through the entries, each one more disturbing than the last. They spoke of campers disappearing, of friends turning against one another, of a presence that lurked in the dark, claiming souls one by one. One final entry caught my eye, written in shaky handwriting. "I see him now, my best friend. His eyes are empty, and his smile is not his own. I fear I am next." My heart lurched. The implication was clear. The woods were not merely haunted by stray phantoms, but were active in their corruption. I realized with dawning horror that the subtle disturbances from earlier, the flickering shadows, the whispering winds, were not random. They were a slow, deliberate invasion of something ancient and malevolent that preyed on human warmth and companionship. Racing back outside, I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. There, emerging from behind a stand of birch trees, was Matt. At first I felt a surge of relief, but something was terribly wrong. His movements were too smooth, too deliberate, as if he were gliding rather than walking. His eyes, once warm and full of life, now shone with a cold, unsettling gleam. "Matt," I called out, voice trembling. He stopped and slowly turned his head to face me. For a moment I caught a glimpse of the friend I knew in the curve of his smile, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by an expression that was blank and distant. "Hey," he said softly, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You shouldn't have come looking for me." I took a hesitant step forward. "Matt, what's going on? This isn't you." His gaze drifted, and then he spoke again, as if reciting lines he'd learned long ago. "The woods changed me. They whispered secrets of darkness and promised a kind of immortality, a freedom from pain. I had to listen. I had to become part of them." His voice was eerily calm, yet every word dripped with a detached menace. My stomach churned as I realized the terrible truth. The presence that had haunted these woods wasn't some external force. It had taken root in my best friend, corrupting him from the inside out. The subtle signs of earlier, the inexplicable noises, the fleeting shadows, were all part of this insidious transformation. In his eyes, I saw not the familiar spark of life, but an abyss that threatened to swallow his very soul. "Matt, fight it," I pleaded, stepping closer, trying to reach the friend I once knew. "This isn't you. You're stronger than whatever that is." For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered with something like confusion, but then the blank mask returned. Without warning, he lunged at me, and a primal instinct kicked in. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding as we grappled in the cold night air. The sound of our struggle, thudding bodies, muffled grunts, and the snap of a twig underfoot echoed through the silent forest. I managed to push him against a large oak, his body rigid and unyielding. In the brief moment our eyes met, I saw a flash of torment buried deep within him, a silent scream begging for release. But the woods had taken hold. With a sudden burst of resolve, I grabbed a fallen branch and swung, desperate to break through the dark influence that gripped him. He staggered, a guttural sound escaping him as if in pain, but he recovered quickly. The confrontation escalated into a frantic struggle beneath the towering pines, the shadows dancing around us like malevolent spectators. Every clash of limbs, every desperate plea felt like a battle, not just for our lives, but for our very souls. In the midst of the chaos, I heard the faint, sorrowful hum of that same eerie whisper, the voice of the woods itself. It seemed to resonate from the very ground beneath us, as if the forest was mourning the loss of its latest victim. I realized then that I was fighting not only for my friend, but against an ancient force that thrived on fear and despair. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I managed to pin Matt against the rough bark of the oak. "Matt, look at me!" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "Remember who you are. Remember the nights we laughed, the dreams we shared. Don't let this monster take you." For a long, excruciating moment, silence reigned. Then, as if caught in the grip of a waking nightmare, his eyes softened ever so slightly. His grip on me loosened, and I felt a flicker of recognition pass over his face, but just as quickly, it was snuffed out by the overwhelming presence that had claimed him. With a strangled cry, he jerked away, and the dark influence surged anew, propelling him back as if he were nothing more than a puppet on invisible strings. The forest around us seemed to close in, and the whispers grew louder, a chorus of despair that drowned out my racing thoughts. In that surreal moment, I realized that there was no easy salvation. The woods had marked us both, and the true threat was not a single malevolent spirit or creature. It was the ancient, relentless hunger of the forest itself, which claimed the souls of those who dared to wander too far from the light. With one final, desperate effort, I stepped back and prepared to run, my heart breaking at the sight of my best friend standing before me as both victim and aggressor. As I fled through the dark undergrowth, the haunting echo of Matt's anguished cry followed me, mingling with the relentless murmur of the pines. I don't know how I made it back to the road that night, or if I even escaped the woods entirely. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear the distant whisper of a familiar voice calling my name from among the trees. Whether I have truly left that cursed place behind, or whether the ancient hunger of the woods continues to linger, waiting for the next unwary soul, I may never know. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street, whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there. But they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6, and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac, or roam around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only the two strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, but Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the U.S. as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then. Eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much, and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look, even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock, about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often. At least I haven't caught her much, but once or twice a month I think she sits out there on our big red couch, just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Da-da-da-da-da-dum. Da-da-da-da-da-dum. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, Everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good and there's no crime, and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings, I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister, Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew. Even I knew. Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then, some bad things happen, but they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was, really exceptionally. Hard to explain, kind of. Nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us, as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part, they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere, and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom, and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house. After dinner, that first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat, and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. Da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. It came, and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously, or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in directly next to us. The previous owner, Ms. Maddie, passed away at age 105. She'd lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about the locking shutters, since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. Do you know who is always out there whistling every night? Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't. See, I can't. I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all of these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to blinds." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry, beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the Whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly, from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer. unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola," I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway, and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blinds shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lips so hard there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night, in that moment, an old ugly terror stitched on his face, a parent's fear. "Just Holden," he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler, but that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Thud, thud, thud. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think?" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police," something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police, call, the police, tap, 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 police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police, police, police, police." "Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook. Then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back to front. Loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle, and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop," Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a minute. Then we heard it. A soft tap, 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 coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was possible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. "Okay," he told us. "It's done." Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house, and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watch Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower, if she'd looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too? To comfort her? To share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. And my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. I've babysat plenty of kids over the years, but nothing ever prepared me for the weekend I spent in the grand but unnervingly silent mansion of the Harringtons, a world away from my small, familiar apartment. When I arrived that late Friday afternoon, the estate loomed before me like an old, watchful sentinel. Its ornate facade and manicured gardens spoke of wealth and pedigree, yet an inexplicable chill ran down my spine as I stepped through the heavy front door. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of polished mahogany corridors and high-ceilinged halls bathed in soft amber light. Every surface gleamed, every object seemed immaculately arranged, but beneath the splendor lay an oppressive stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I was to watch over their only child, Oliver, a precocious 8-year-old with dark, penetrating eyes and an unsettling calm about him. The first evening was deceptively normal. I spent the early hours playing board games and reading stories with Oliver in his lavish, pastel-colored nursery. His laughter was bright and infectious, and for a while, the house's eerie silence seemed to recede into the background. I tucked him into a grand 4-poster bed adorned with delicate lace, kissed his forehead, and promised I'd check in on him throughout the night. As I left his room, I couldn't shake the feeling that those wide, curious eyes held secrets too heavy for someone so young. That night, as I sat in the quiet of the living room reading by the flickering light of a table lamp, I first heard it, a soft, almost musical giggle drifting from somewhere deep within the mansion. I told myself it was simply the sound of my imagination playing tricks after a long day, but a nagging unease began to settle in my chest. A gentle breeze rustled through the corridors, and shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls, as if the darkness was alive and reaching out. Around midnight, I was awoken by a series of creaks and muffled thumps. The sound led me to the nursery, where the dim light of a night lamp cast trembling shapes over the walls. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated before pushing it open. The room was silent, too silent. Oliver's sleeping form lay in the center of the bed, his small chest rising and falling in time with his slow, measured breaths. Yet the soft hum of a lullaby echoed faintly, one I couldn't place, as if whispered by unseen voices. I crossed the room, my skin prickling with a mix of worry and dread. In the corner, I noticed something that made my heart clench. A set of small, hand-printed footprints leading from the crib to the window, as if the child had wandered out and then returned. But Oliver was fast asleep, and the window was firmly shut. I brushed away the chill that ran down my spine, convinced that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. The following morning, I tried to dismiss the night's events as nothing more than a restless dream. Yet as daylight crept through the stained glass windows, subtle signs of disarray began to emerge. In the playroom, toys were not where they had been left the night before, and a series of crudely drawn symbols, strange, looping marks, had appeared on the walls near Oliver's door. When I asked him about them, his response was a soft shrug, his gaze distant and unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was joking or if he knew more than he let on. That evening, with a storm brewing outside, the mansion transformed into a place of whispered secrets and shifting shadows. The wind rattled the ancient windows, and the corridors moaned as if mourning centuries of sorrow. I found myself unable to shake a growing paranoia, the feeling that I was being watched from every corner. Every creak of the floorboards, every tap at the window set my nerves on edge. After dinner, I settled Oliver down for the night once again. I double-checked the locks on his nursery door and lingered in the hallway, determined to make one last round before sleep claimed me. Passing by a mirror in the corridor, I caught a glimpse of a small figure. A flash of movement behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, only to find nothing but my own anxious reflection. Yet the feeling of being pursued, of being stalked by unseen eyes, wouldn't let go. Later that night, as the clock ticked past 2 in the morning, I was roused by a soft rustling coming from Oliver's room. The door, which I had been sure was securely closed, was now cracked open just enough for a sliver of darkness to seep out. Gathering my courage, I crept toward the nursery, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam of light revealed a scene that sent a jolt of terror through me. Oliver was sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide and unnaturally calm, and his small hands were gently stroking an old, worn doll that I didn't recognize. A doll with glassy eyes and a smile that seemed too fixed, too sinister. "Oliver?" I whispered, stepping into the room. His head slowly tilted toward me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something in his gaze, a darkness that shouldn't reside in a child's eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a vacant stare. The doll in his arms shifted position, its porcelain face cracking in a way that sent shards of dread through my heart. I knelt beside him, trying to rouse him from whatever strange stupor he'd fallen into, but he didn't respond. Instead, he pointed silently toward a door in the far corner of the nursery, a door I'd never seen before. Its surface was old, scarred with what looked like faded symbols, and it emitted a low, almost rhythmic humming that vibrated through the floor. Against every instinct, I followed his gaze and approached the door. With trembling fingers, I reached for the cold brass knob and pulled it open. Beyond the door lay a narrow, dust-choked passageway. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, like old blood. I hesitated at the threshold, heart pounding as the silence pressed in around me. Was this a part of the house I had never seen, or something hidden away on purpose? A muffled sound, like a whisper, seemed to beckon me further into the darkness. Before I could retreat, the passageway filled with movement. In the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of a small figure darting away, too quick to be anything but real. My mind raced. Had Oliver led me here, or was something else lurking in the shadows? I took a deep breath and stepped into the passage, the door closing behind me with a final echoing click. The narrow corridor opened into a small, hidden room, lined with faded wallpaper and cluttered with old photographs and journals. As I sifted through the scattered items, one leather-bound journal caught my attention. Its pages were yellowed with age, filled with hurried, illegible scrawls and cryptic drawings. The entries spoke of rituals, of a presence that was born in the depths of the mansion, and of a child destined to be its vessel. One entry in particular sent a shiver down my spine. In the silence of the night, the child awakens the darkness within. The laughter of innocence masks the call of ancient hunger. The implication was clear and horrifying. Oliver wasn't merely a quirky child. He was the focal point of something malevolent that had been festering within these walls for generations. I clutched the journal, my mind reeling with the realization that the subtle, strange events of the past 2 nights were no accident. They were the harbingers of a dark transformation, and I was now caught in its wake. The soft giggles, the shifting shadows, the inexplicable rearrangement of toys, it all pointed to a presence that had latched on to Oliver, twisting his natural charm into something insidious. Racing back to the nursery, journal in hand, I found the room plunged into an even deeper darkness than before. The only light came from the flickering night lamp, casting erratic patterns on the walls. Oliver was standing by the window now, his back to me, his figure outlined by the pale glow of the moon. The doll lay abandoned on the bed, its head tilted in a disturbingly unnatural angle. I approached him slowly, my heart hammering in my ears. "Oliver, sweetheart, come here," I called softly, trying to mask the trembling in my voice. He didn't turn around immediately. Instead, a low, almost imperceptible humming began to resonate in the room, an echo of the mysterious sound from the hidden passageway. Then, in one swift, heart-stopping moment, Oliver turned. His eyes, normally so full of innocent mischief, now glowed with an eerie luminescence. The transformation was subtle at first, a slight tilt of his head, a too smooth movement of his hand. But in that moment I realized the truth. The child I had come to care for was no longer just a frightened, playful boy. Something dark and ancient had taken root within him. His lips parted, and a voice that was not his own, deep and resonant, filled the room. "You shouldn't have come here," it intoned, each word dripping with malice. The sound was layered, as if multiple voices spoke in unison, echoing from a place far beyond the realm of childhood. For a split second, I saw the boy I knew flash across his face. Confusion, pleading, and a spark of recognition. But it was swallowed up by the overwhelming presence that now controlled him. I stepped back, terror making my limbs tremble as he advanced toward me. The room seemed to contract, the walls closing in with suffocating inevitability. "Oliver, fight it," I pleaded, reaching out to grab his arm, desperate to break the hold that the dark force had over him. His small hand was ice cold as it met mine, and in that contact, I felt an unfathomable chill, a glimpse of the abyss that lay within. The night lamp flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls, and the soft hum of that ancient voice grew louder, almost deafening in its intensity. In a moment that stretched into eternity, the confrontation escalated. The child, no, the entity within him, lunged forward with an inhuman swiftness. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table as the force of his movement sent me reeling. The doll fell from the bed with a shattering clatter, its porcelain face splitting slightly, mirroring the fracture in my own sense of reality. Desperation took hold as I fumbled for anything to use as a barrier, anything to break the malignant connection. My hand found a heavy vase on a nearby shelf, a relic of a time when this mansion had echoed with laughter rather than whispers of dread. Clutching it tightly, I steeled myself for what felt like the fight of my life. "Oliver, please," I cried, voice cracking with emotion and fear. "You're my friend. You can fight this." For one agonizing second, his eyes held mine, the familiar kind eyes of the little boy who had laughed with me moments before. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, the eyes hardened, and the creature within him snarled, a sound that was a cacophony of agony and malice. With a strength that belied his small frame, he pushed me back, sending me crashing against the wall. The impact stole my breath, and I slid to the floor, dazed as the room spun around me. In that disoriented haze, the ancient humming reached a fevered pitch, and I felt an overwhelming pressure, as if the very air were thick with malevolence. I forced myself to crawl toward him, every movement a monumental effort. "Oliver, I'm here," I whispered, voice raw with both pain and determination. "You have to come back." For a long, suspended moment, the room was filled only with the sound of our ragged breathing, and the relentless hum of that unholy chorus. Then slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, Oliver's features softened. His hand, which had been raised in aggression, dropped to his side, and his luminous eyes dimmed to a familiar, tearful gaze. But the reprieve was brief. In the blink of an eye, the dark presence surged forth again, swallowing the boy's tender expression and replacing it with a vacant, hollow stare. The entity spoke once more, its voice a resonant murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "You should never have tried to save him." At that, a violent gust of wind burst through the room, extinguishing the night lamp and plunging us into near-total darkness. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my ears as the sounds of a struggle, of a battle fought on a plane beyond simple human strength, filled the space around us. In the chaos, I managed to force my way to the door and flee into the endless corridors of the mansion, each step punctuated by the echo of Oliver's tormented cries. I burst out into the cold, damp night, the mansion's imposing silhouette receding behind me as the first hints of dawn began to break on the horizon. I never saw Oliver again that morning. In the days that followed, the Harringtons insisted that he had gone missing without a trace, and whispers of an unexplainable night became the quiet subject of hushed conversations. I was left with a haunting memory, a blurred line between the innocent laughter of a child and the soul-crushing echo of an ancient, malevolent force. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is low and the world is silent, I can still hear those distant, echoing whispers, the faint sound of a child's plea mingled with the darkness. And I wonder, as I struggle to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in my own life, was that horrifying night the end of a terrible possession, or merely the beginning of a legacy that still lingers within the mansion's walls? 3 months ago, I learned of my uncle's passing. We weren't particularly close, but he left me one of his houses in the will. I was touched, but just wanted to sell it off. I'm a fairly new father of twin girls and didn't need another thing to manage right now. To speed up the process, I decided to travel across the country to live in the house until a sale was assured. My job just requires a laptop and phone, so I was approved to work remotely for the time being. Unfortunately, my wife had to stay at her job, so I had to come alone. At first, I treated it as a mini vacation. I had hoped it would only last a week, but the process was more involved than I thought. I had a realtor taking care of most things, but after a month, I'm still here. I noticed things going wrong right away. Stuff was never where I last placed it. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I'd lose track of time constantly. I thought it was caused by stress, loneliness. Except for the few times the realtor came by with prospective buyers, the house was the quietest place I had ever been in. Before I completely lost my mind, the neighbor came by with a dog. She was an elderly woman who explained that she had been dog-sitting while my uncle was in the hospital. Now that I was here, she thought I should take Buster, the golden retriever. I thought the neighbor might have been forgetful, because she seemed to think my uncle had just passed last week. Either way, I fell in love with Buster, and his presence was exactly what I needed. I even thought it would be a tremendous present to bring home to my girls. I just hoped my wife would feel the same way. However, even the dog could tell something was wrong with the house. Buster accepted his new living arrangements pretty quickly, but would never willingly go upstairs. This was all right with me at the time. I thought it would make it easier to keep track of him. Then Buster disappeared. Literally 1 second he was standing right behind me as I was opening the treat jar to give him a snack. My eyes left him for just a moment to put the jar back, and then he was gone. I ran through the whole house, calling his name. The kitchen was connected to the living room, and on the other end of that was the master bedroom and study. The other end of the kitchen led to a dining room, which was connected to the entrance hall that also led into the living room and stairs to the second floor. After walking upstairs, you had a choice of right or left, along a balcony that overlooked the living room on one side and entrance on the other. Going left led immediately to a guest room and game room. Going right led to 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I looked in every room and had to accept that somehow the dog made it outside, even though there was no doggy door and every door and window had been closed and locked. So I searched the surrounding neighborhood for another hour before giving up. I was thinking about making flyers when I opened the front door and heard Buster scrambling towards me from the kitchen. I was ecstatic, of course, but I just couldn't wrap my head around how I could have missed him. I let Buster sleep in the bed with me that night. In hindsight, it was a huge mistake, but it made me feel better at the time. Things picked up at work, though, and I soon forgot about all the strangeness surrounding this house. Clients called me constantly, but we were getting a lot done, and I landed multiple large contracts in a row. I was working around the clock, but I knew I'd be due a promotion once I returned to the home office. Several times I'd get lost in a phone call or spreadsheet and suddenly find that it was nighttime. I'd be so absorbed with work that I would block out Buster whining for food or to go outside. I started to set alarms to keep track, but I had too many important clients to slow down. I was on top of the world, but my health was starting to suffer. I'd forget to eat and even sleep sometimes. There was always something else to do or someone to talk to. I even got better at taking care of Buster, better than I was taking care of myself, at least. Then my good mood ended with a bang, literally. Buster was whining behind me as I finished another spreadsheet. Then we both heard a door slam upstairs. For the first time since I brought him inside, Buster ran upstairs by himself. I almost called the cops, but I felt silly with the phone in my hand. I started to doubt I had heard anything at all. And if there were an intruder, surely Buster would have been making more noise. So I mustered all the courage I could manage and crept upstairs with frying pan as my weapon. It was dark upstairs, but enough moonlight was coming in from the downstairs windows for me to make out Buster standing in front of the bathroom. I had purposely closed every door when I last came through here looking for the lost dog, but this door was now wide open. I flipped on the hallway light, but nothing happened. With no better ideas, I raised my frying pan high and walked slowly to the bathroom. There was no window in here, so it was pure darkness inside. I was terrified. Bizarrely, Buster just looked frozen. His tail stood straight up, and he just stood there, pointed towards the door. I tried to take it as a good sign that he still wasn't barking. That's what finally got me through the threshold and into the bathroom. The whole time my eyes had been getting used to the darkness, and the bathroom was too small for there to have been anyone there without me noticing. I started to relax, so when I took a step forward into something sticky, I suddenly realized that I had my cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and turned it on to cast some light on the floor. I immediately dropped it at the sight of the bright red liquid that surrounded my feet. I fled the upstairs, and this triggered Buster to follow. This time I had no trouble calling the police. Thankfully, there was already a patrol car nearby, so 2 officers arrived within a couple of minutes. Their powerful flashlights cut through the darkness like knives, but they soon found nothing was wrong with the upstairs lights. Something did appear to be wrong with my pipes, though, as they called out from above, that the puddle was just rusty water. Because of their insistence, I climbed up the stairs again and clearly saw a muddy brown puddle in the bathroom. The banging must have been from a pipe breaking. Both cops had a laugh at my expense, but were otherwise understanding. They even gave me a number of good plumber, though my cell phone was ruined after I dropped and left it in the puddle. I would have to use the one landline in the kitchen from now on. I let them out and promised to call the plumber first thing in the morning. Yet, as exhausted as I was, I couldn't go to sleep over that excitement, so I stayed up to draft some more important documents for my company. Before I knew it, Buster had made another mess in the living room. I was dead tired and said some things to Buster that maybe I shouldn't have, and I did some things to him that I know I really shouldn't have. I decided to do something about the stress I had been under, and I spoke to my supervisor that same morning. To my surprise, They were happy to let me have the week off as a sort of mental vacation. Just like that, all my outstanding work was taken away. With nothing else to do, I tried to focus on Buster. I played games with him and fed him a bunch of treats to make up for my earlier neglect. Then I found the first message. I didn't notice it for some time since I had been avoiding the second floor, but I realized that I hadn't actually called the plumber. Before doing so, I went upstairs to see if things had gotten any worse. Instead, I immediately saw a message written in red on the hallway wall. It read, "Losing your mind." For a second, I kinda did. I was scared to death at the thought that someone had to have sneaked into my house while I was there. Probably when I was sleeping. I won't bear repeating everything I said or did right after. Let's just say I hadn't become any braver since the banging. Eventually, I unlocked my bedroom door and made my way to the kitchen with Buster leading the way. I called the police again. Those same 2 officers were able to show up, and then slowly, we cleared every inch of the house. Yet we found no one. Everything was locked. No sign of forced entry. The police actually took me seriously, something that bewildered me at the time, and admitted that this isn't the first house in this neighborhood to experience this. There had been a series of break-ins where nothing was stolen, but the police officers still offered to have a car sit outside for the night. Even though I took them up on this, I soon realized that I'd never get to sleep tonight in this house. So I called my only friend in town, and really in the whole state, an old college roommate who coincidentally lived 30 minutes away. He offered to pick me and Buster up in a few hours, so I busied myself with packing up my suitcase. I didn't know how long I would need, so I pretty much packed everything I had brought with me to the house in the first place. I left my room to pick up some doggy toys when my friend called to say he was waiting outside. I decided to hang up the phone and meet him immediately. I needed the human company, and he could help me move my stuff. But the driveway was empty. There was no friend, no car. I called him back immediately, and he insisted he was outside. I listened to him get out of his car and walk up to the front door. He knocked, and I could hear the door open and an elderly woman greet him. My friend asked for my name and mentioned my uncle. The woman said she had never heard of either of us. After thanking her, my friend left and asked me if I had gotten all that. I told him I must have given him the wrong address. He rattled off the correct one and confirmed he was there. After asking him to wait, and I left the house again. I walked out to the street and looked back at the numbers written on the curb and on the mailbox. Only there weren't any numbers, just a message. "Losing your mind," on the curb, written in red. The temptation to leave right away was great. I could just start walking and never stop. But I had to get my stuff, and more importantly, Buster, so I entered the house one last time. When I came back to the room, my suitcase was empty. Everything I had just spent the last hour packing up was back in its proper place. Despite how impossible this was, I focused on only one goal. We needed to leave. I put a leash on Buster and was shocked to see how haggard he was. I resolved to make it up to him when this was all over. I tried to leave out the front door like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't open it. The knob turned freely, but the deadbolt wouldn't slide back. I was really scared now, but Buster's presence helped. I knelt down to give him a hug, and he gave me an idea while licking my face. Whatever was happening, it sure wasn't the result of a maniac hiding in my house. Still, I didn't know what forces were actually opposing me, so I walked to the backyard and said loudly, "Well, Buster, time for a little walk." The glass door slid open easily. Buster bounded out happily. I guess it had been a long time since I let him outside. I followed more tentatively, and for the first time, examined the backyard closely. There was an iron fence surrounding the yard, with another space between the bars that Buster could slip through. And then I saw it, a tree that grew too close to the fence and had several branches extending through and above it. I assumed the gate would be supernaturally locked, too, so this was my exit. Buster didn't need any prodding. He waited patiently for me on the other side as I painfully pulled myself up and over the fence. I was suddenly aware of how weak and tired my recent lifestyle had made me. When I was in the process of climbing down the tree on the other side, Buster growled once and then took off like a shot towards a nearby hill. I jumped down and gave chase. He disappeared over the top, and I scrambled to keep up on the surprisingly steep surface. Luckily, I found where someone had laid some stone bricks into the side for an easier way up. It was still steep enough that I had to focus on placing my feet correctly to keep from sliding, so I was looking down when my next reach up resulted in my hand grabbing carpet. Confused, I looked up, see the second floor landing. I looked down to see the rest of the stairs that led to the entrance hall and living room of the house. Buster was nowhere to be found. Demoralized and dead tired, I crawled the final steps and just sat on the landing for a while, occasionally calling for Buster. Eventually, the kitchen phone rang. Whatever ghosts were messing with me, I realized they couldn't stop outside forces from helping. I tumbled down the stairs in my haste and landed hard on the cold tiles below. But I was only dazed for a second, and soon was in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. My wife's warm voice filled me with hope. She was concerned that she hadn't heard from me in a while. I couldn't recall the last time I had even tried. She was trying to tell me that my work hadn't heard from me in a week, while I tried to tell her to call the police. Her words gave me pause, though. I asked, "What do you mean?" I was given the week off. "Dear, I thought you were supposed to continue working as soon as you got there." Yeah, but they gave me a week off because of all the stress I've been under." "Wait a second. How long have I been out here?" "Honey, you've been gone almost 9 days now." My stomach sunk, but I didn't hesitate to say, "Listen, you need to call the cops. Something is wrong. I think I'm having a medical emergency." I had just been trying to come up with an excuse to limit the amount of follow-up questions, but I ended up realizing that this was actually the most likely explanation. Maybe I was just suffering from a gas leak or brain tumor. Ironically, either of those options seemed preferable than living in a haunted house. My wife asked, "Baby, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I thought I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye as I answered, "Yes, I'm okay, but no, I need help. There's something wrong about this house." "You aren't making any sense." "Just listen to me. Call the police and tell him my uncle's name. Tell them to come to this house and an ambulance might be needed. Please help me." "Please help you? Pretty please?" With a cherry on top. I stared at the phone in my hand as my wife's voice continued to come out of it. It sounded like her, but in a mocking tone I've never actually heard from her before. She said, "Does your tummy hurt? When's the last time you ate? I wonder what Buster tastes like." I slammed the phone down, but whatever it was on the other side was right. My stomach was hurting. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten. On cue, I heard Buster whining from upstairs. Only after I started running towards the stairs did I notice just how bruised and sore my legs were from my spill down those steps. I pushed through the pain and climbed the stairs yet again. Buster was back in front of the bathroom, lying on his side and looking thinner than I had ever seen him. "Losing your mind" was written all over the hallway now, including on the ceiling and floor. I no longer had any doubt the messages were written in blood. Some of them were still dripping. I walked over and picked up Buster while a banging started at my front door. I would have jumped if Buster hadn't been weighing me down. I heard the front door open, and whoever it was identified themselves as the police. I even recognized the voice as belonging to one of the officers who had visited previously. Why can't I remember his name? After calling out that I was upstairs, I turned with Buster and found the hallway stretched before me, many times its original length. Despite how thin he looked, Buster felt heavier than ever. I knew this was all just some sort of trick to not get me in touch with the police officer. I thought I must have really been talking to my wife. She had to have come through with calling the police, and the ghosts just distorted the end of the call. So I started my trek back to the stairs and shuffled my feet as fast as I could, yelling all the way. But then a voice answered the police officer, a woman's voice, my wife's voice. I could hear her say, "I'm sorry, my husband wasn't feeling well." He's resting in the bedroom. Can I help you?" I screamed as loud as I could, just to get attention. But it was no use. I heard the officer say, "I'd like to check up on him, all the same." Sure, come in. He's right through here." It was right out of a nightmare. I was sweating profusely while every step seemed to get me nowhere. I tried to speed up, but the hallway just stretched further, and then I heard a man's blood-curdling scream from downstairs. Suddenly the hallway snapped back, and I found myself somehow right at the top of the stairs. My momentum couldn't be stopped. I fell down the stairs and landed hard, on top of Buster. He howled in pain, but at least he was alive. I saw a long, thick trail of blood go around the corner and under my closed bedroom door. There was still a shadow of something under the door. I painfully crept to the kitchen and grabbed my trusty frying pan before making my way back to the bedroom door as quietly as I could. My eyes watched the moving shadows nervously. Whatever was waiting there had killed a man. That meant it could kill me. But if it could have a physical impact, then surely it had to be susceptible to a physical impact, too. So I raised the frying pan and slowly started to turn the handle. Before I made much progress, the door flew open on its own, and something turned suddenly to me. I swung my frying pan down. The cop stood before me, a smile frozen on his face. We both looked down at the knife plunged into his chest. My hand was still wrapped around the handle. He fell to the side, and I fell backwards to sit heavily on the now clean floor. I was positive I had picked up the frying pan. I could remember its weight. But now I also remembered going to the kitchen and pulling out the knife. I seriously wondered if I was losing my mind. I looked down to find I had the knife in my hands again. I dropped it at once and crawled back to check on Buster. He wasn't moving. I put my head on his flank and was devastated to feel he was still warm but not breathing. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I did nothing for a long time. I was lethargic, but somehow made it to the couch in the living room. I waited there until nightfall, and then slept on the couch. When I woke up, I waited some more. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but nothing horrible was happening to me while I waited. I wasn't in a hurry to change that. But the bodies of Buster and the cop were still there. I needed to do something. My stomach rumbled as I finally got off the couch. That was another problem with just staying put. First things first, I found a shovel in an outdoor closet attached to the backyard porch. Digging the hole was exhausting, so I settled for just burying Buster now. I planned on getting to the cop after finding something to eat. I picked up Buster and carried him outside. His fur was still so warm, it was hard to believe he was gone. But there was no life behind his big brown eyes. I gently laid him down in the hole and got to work. Sometime later I wandered into the kitchen and raided the pantry. The house was quiet apart from my efforts. Whenever I stopped moving, the silence was complete. I wondered if the ghosts had just been trying to make me a murderer after all. Now that their goal had been met, maybe they would leave me alone for a while. Just in time because I was starving and didn't need any more distractions. I opened a box of cereal and had a handful up to my lips when I paused. How could I tell I was actually eating what I was looking at? What if I had actually been opening a box of rat poison? I still wasn't sure what these ghosts were capable of. I imagined the food turning into worms after it was already in my mouth. With that thought, I threw the cereal to the ground and stomped off, no longer hungry. I needed to concentrate my efforts on leaving this place. Right on cue, I walked by the front door. It was wide open. Instinctively, I made a leap for it before stopping with my outstretched hand just a foot short of the door. This had to be another trick. I could see the door slamming shut in my face, or even taking a few of my fingers with it. I could feel a breeze enter the house, but I was too scared to move. This was the most impossible situation I had ever been in, or even heard of. All of my senses had failed me before. However, my need for freedom eventually caused my feet to move. Upon slowly exiting the house, I saw the cop car just sitting in my driveway. The door was unlocked and the keys were sitting in the front seat. My mind went wild trying to explain the situation. Maybe the cop was secretly a murderer and had killed previous owners of this house. Maybe his sacrifice helped them move on. I couldn't think of any other explanation for my good luck at the time. So I just pushed my misgivings down and got in. I drove out of the neighborhood without incident, but I had new problems. I was in an unfamiliar city, driving a cop car, with no money or other belongings on me, and I had no idea what to do next. So I kept driving. It felt good to be free of that house. It felt good to see the sun. So I kept driving, on and on. Left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn. No idea where I'm going. And then I realized I hadn't seen any other cars on the road for some time. Where was everyone? Where was I? The sinking feeling happened again, in the pit of my stomach, but also around my whole body. I sunk back into the car seat, and then realized I was sitting in an armchair, back in the living room of my uncle's house. My arms were up, like I was still holding onto a steering wheel. I started to cry with frustration as I stood up and screamed. How long had I been sitting there with a stupid grin, moving my arms up and down like a madman? I turned around and saw my work laptop on the dining room table. It was on and glowing at me. I walked over to it and saw that something was already written down in this post. It read, "Lost your mind? Good. Now you won't mind losing the rest." Suddenly my fist felt weighed down. I raised it to find another kitchen knife in my hand. I dropped it immediately. I erased the message and started to type out a request for help. I ignored the screen and just focused on the keys. But I kept hitting them wrong, and another message slowly formed. "I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time. Goodbye." I could have screamed again, but I noticed something had changed. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the study. I kept writing and writing and writing, and my own words started to come out. I have sent out emails requesting help. I've posted on the local police department's Facebook for assistance, and I've just tried to keep writing no matter what. This is my latest attempt to keep my sanity. Whenever I've tried to take a break, I find myself in a new room with new horrors descending on me. Once I opened the study door out to a hellish landscape and almost stepped out onto lava. I wasn't sure if it was all an illusion, but I didn't even want to have a vision of my feet burning, so I just closed the door and resumed writing. I'm not even sure this is all because of ghosts. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and the truth is simply that I have no idea what's going on. As I've gone over these crazy events, I've realized that I can't recall my uncle's name, or what he looked like. I'm not sure I ever had an uncle. I'm trying to think really hard about how I came here. Did I fly? Drive? I can't remember. Have I always been here? Even weirder, I can't remember my realtor's name, or even what gender they are. I've met them in person several times. Why don't I know things I should? I can't even remember the name of my daughters or my wife. Am I even a father? Am I even a person? I know I must be, because here I am writing in this small study. But now that I think about it, I can't remember who my parents are, what they look like, or anything about my childhood. Now, I just remember this house and all the nightmares, waking and otherwise, I've experienced here. I'm feeling a lot like I was back in the cop car. I found a way forward, but I really don't know what to do next. This is not a way to live, and I'm getting more and more tired. I'm so hungry, and I'm finding it harder to focus. I keep hearing voices, and they're getting louder. I know if I stop writing, I won't last long, but I'm running out of things to say. My hands are tired. I'm tired. So tired.d. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. I need to keep writing, but I don't know what to say anymore. What's my name? I don't know. I'll die if I stop writing. I'll die if I stop working. A, B, C, E, R, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, Q, P, R, S, T, U, V, W, Y, X, A, N, D, Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. Dogs. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him one last time. But was he ever real? Is anything? I'm so tired. So hungry. I need to focus. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy goodbye. The quick brown, I'm sorry, jumped over. Pointed you, lazy dogs. Goodbye. I'm quick, I've jumped, disapped the all last time, lazy dogs. I'm sorry. Jumped over, disappointed you, lazy. For the lazy dogs, goodbye. I'm sorry, I've disappointed you all. For the last time, goodbye.